Welcome to Misquoting Jesus with Bart Ehrman, the only show where a six-time New York Times best-selling author and world-renowned Bible scholar uncovers the many fascinating, little-known facts about the New Testament, the historical Jesus, and the rise of Christianity. I'm your host, Megan Lewis. Let's begin. Hello and welcome back to Misquoting Jesus. Today we are going to be exploring the question of whether biblical scholarship destroys faith. Something I've heard from more than one atheist friend is that they only began questioning the Bible and the validity of their faith when they started to actually study the biblical text. Similarly, Bart and biblical scholars like him are familiar with the accusation that they're only out to deconvert the faithful. What is the relationship between biblical scholarship and the loss of religious faith? Does the academic interrogation of a holy text destroy one's belief, or is it a little bit more complex than that? Before we get into all of that, though, Bart, how are you doing this week?
Yeah, I'm doing well. It's the professorial life is a little bit strange because of the rhythms of it. It's just not like what others do for a living, and the scheduling especially. I was thinking last week that I'm 67 years old, and I still think in terms of semesters. There's like, most people that ended about 45 years ago. Yeah. How are you doing?
Similar, actually, although I'm not a student and I teach very irregularly, I'm still very much in the academic year mode. I haven't shifted out of it. I suspect a lot of that is due to having children still in school. It's not the same semester system, but everything is run based on whether or not the schools are going. So, yeah.
Right. And you've got your kids are at a range of ages. And so it's like, yeah, my
We'll
daughter
be
like
doing this
that.
for a while.
So yeah, you just kind of like the never ending story. Yeah.
Yeah. But no, we're having fun. I'm managing to get bits and pieces done, and the kids are all having just a good time, I think, being at home and not having to be anywhere at a specific time. I always really enjoyed that when I was a child, not having that very rigid routine over the
Yeah.
summer.
Yeah.
We
Yeah,
just
no,
played.
summers you know, I was always one of these nerdy kids who really liked when school started. I mean, I loved the summer because I played sports. I was always playing, tennis and baseball and golf and stuff as a kid. But then did something about school was also but the break, I think the break is really important for young minds and for 67-year-old minds.
Well, we can't have too much of a break because you and I do still have to think and talk and be
Mm.
coherent and hopefully intelligent. So we're talking about biblical scholarship and deconversion and the loss of faith and that whole thing. And I was thinking that I don't like making definitive statements about things that I'm not an expert in. It's something that I think many academics sympathize with, but I suspect, without being able to prove it, I strongly suspect that no Christian goes into biblical scholarship expecting to deconvert. It's not your plan. You're actually going to go in and be the one person who kind of brings everyone back into the fold. You do it to deepen your understanding of something, a text that is deeply holy and personal to you. Why do you think that deconversions do occur? And do you have the sense that they happen at a higher rate among biblical scholars than the rest of the population?
Those are both really good questions. And I should say at the outset that it kind of depends what you mean by deconversion, because my leaving Christianity was not related to my scholarship. My leaving Christianity was about other things, but in terms of deconverting from being a Bible believing evangelical Christian, absolutely the scholarship is what did it for me. I would say that does happen for a lot of scholars. I don't think, though, it actually probably happens at a greater rate than for others. When I say for others who actually are like thinking about the Bible seriously. I know a lot of people who are not scholars who were raised in an evangelical tradition who came to realize that the Bible was problematic. And I'd say probably about the same number of them, end up with a different kind of faith or possibly with no faith. I don't know too many scholars I don't know too many scholars at all, New Testament scholars, who have actually become non-Christian. I'm a bit of an odd duck that way.
So my husband, I know I mentioned him before, Joshua Bowen was a very literal Bible as historical fact Christian. I think you two would have had an awful lot in common had you met at the same ages. And I mentioned, I think, also that he went into Assyriology in the first place to get a better understanding of the historical context of the Hebrew Bible. When he took Syro-Palestinian history as a graduate student, the revelation that much of what we know of the region's history directly contradicts the biblical narrative kind of forced him to take a step backwards and reconsider the worldview that he was raised with. And ultimately that did lead to his complete deconversion from Christianity, but definitely a downgrading of the fundamentalism. What role do you think a person's understanding of the Bible before they embark on scholarship, be it academic or self-directed, before they embark on this biblical scholarship, has on the longevity of their faith? And do you think that someone with a more literal view of the Bible is more susceptible to this deconversion or downgrading?
Right. I often hear from people who are evaluating me that the reason I became a non-Christian is because I was a fundamentalist, and if I'd just been their kind of Christian, then it wouldn't have been a
The
problem.
right kind of Christian.
Yeah, and so I get that. I wasn't born a fundamentalist, and I was actually raised as a non-fundamentalist, and I was a fundamentalist for about 7 years of my life, and they were formative years. It's an interesting question whether fundamentalists are more likely to leave the faith than more liberal, kind of open-minded Christians. I think the answer is probably yes, uh, but I don't have any statistics to back it up. There are a lot of people who think that when they're Christians, when they're Bible believing Christians, many people think that if the Bible's not completely accurate, then there's no reason to be a Christian. I think that's crazy, personally. And I just think it's crazy. I don't know why I do know why. I do know why so many people believe it, but I think it's wrong. But it's a reality that many people do feel that way. And if that's how you feel, if that's your belief, then once you're shown problems in the Bible, just the whole thing goes away. That's not what happened with me, but it does happen because people don't realize that Christianity historically has not been a religion that is about the Bible. It's about Christ. And the Bible is important to Christianity, has always been important to Christianity, but it's never been the object of faith. It's not supposed to be the object of faith. And if it is the object of faith, that's idolatry within Christianity. And so the idea that you've got to believe in the Bible, that's just a modern form of Christian idolatry, as far as I'm concerned. But since so many people have that view, that when they realize, oh my God, there are contradictions. Oh, there are mistakes. Well, I guess I can't be a Christian anymore. As if if Genesis 1 contradicts Genesis 2, then somehow Christ cannot reveal God. What? What? It doesn't make any sense, but it's just what people have heard. And so that's what they think.
I was talking to Josh about this actually last night, discussing his own religious path and talking about the role that education played in it. And he felt that for him, at least, the problem wasn't necessarily that there was an issue, one contradiction with the Bible. It's that when he was put into grad school, he was kind of put into this immersion therapy of these are all of the things that we know about history. This is all of the ways. I mean, people weren't going around pointing it out to him. We weren't sitting in classes and our professor saying, now this is wrong and this is wrong and this is wrong.
Yeah.
But when you're taking so many classes that relate to the Bible, and like many fundamentalists, Josh knows the Bible literally inside out. So he could pick out things during class that didn't chime with what he knew from the biblical text. And he said that because there were so many things, the volume just meant that he couldn't he couldn't kind of come to terms with them one at a time. So everything kind of forced him to take this step back. And I was wondering, because you teach undergraduates who have, I think, a much less intensive confrontation, unless they're biblical majors, they're not taking just Bible classes. They might take a couple of semesters, so they won't get this volume. So you teach undergraduates and graduate students. Do you suspect that this difference in volume might have an impact in a person's ability to maintain their faith in the face of biblical and historical issues?
I think so, because if you take an undergraduate class on the New Testament, then you have a semester, and you probably study the Gospels, and you realize there are mistakes, and you're trying to figure it out, and and you end up not really sure how to figure it out, maybe. But next semester you're taking European history, and you're taking calculus, and you're taking whatever, and so it's like not a kind of a constant barrage. Where if you're in graduate school studying this stuff, you're even in a master's program, say a master's of divinity program is what I had, where I didn't have all my classes in Bible, but I had a lot of classes in Bible and theology, and it's just like constantly seeing what the issues are. And after a while, you just have to deal with it in a way that you don't have to if you've just taken this class once. And so I think the volume absolutely makes a big difference, but it means you become intimately familiar with the material, and it's like another human being. You get to know somebody better when you spend tons of time with them. You might think you know them after a night or two, a day or two, but it's like, no, you don't know them. And it's like that with any field of study. You can have some passing familiarity with it, but until you're intimately familiar with it, you don't really know its ins and outs.
So you mentioned earlier that you didn't start out a fundamentalist, and we've talked about this on other episodes. Can you talk a little bit more about the impact that starting biblical scholarship had on your own faith journey?
Yeah, so when I got really interested in the Bible is when I became a born again evangelical Christian when I was a teenager, and that's when I started reading the Bible a lot. And when I went to Moody Bible Institute after high school, I was intensely studying the Bible, but it wasn't biblical scholarship in the way we're talking now. It wasn't historical scholarship trying to situate the Bible in a historical context, understanding it in its original meaning based on, our knowledge of Greek and Hebrew and that sort of thing. Once I started studying the Bible like that, I was desperate to do it. I was really eager to do it because I thought as an evangelical, I was just going to master this material, and I was going to be. I wanted to become a university professor in a secular university as a evangelical Christian, so it'd be kind of like a mission field for me. And I was armed not to accept any of these crazy liberal views that I knew were out there by these people who called themselves Christian. But what do they know? And including my professors in graduate school. But after a while, I just became so. At some point, you just have to be honest, and whether you have to go where knowledge takes you, or else you just put your head in the sand. And I just decided I wasn't going to put my head in the sand, and just even if it made me terrifically uncomfortable, I would pursue whatever it was that what I was studying. And so when I got into the scholarship, I originally continued to maintain my evangelical beliefs, but it was only when I started realizing that they were leading me to interpret things in ways that just didn't make any sense. And I got to a point where I said, look, if God's given me a brain, he wants me to use it. And it doesn't mean that I have to use it in order to like go against him. It's if something's true, then it's true. And if it's true, God's behind it. And so I shouldn't be afraid of truth, even if it ends up meaning that I end up thinking something different from what I've always thought.
You mentioned that you're a bit of an odd duck in that you deconverted fully to not being a religious person. What is your the general sense of the trajectory that it seems like more people take?
Um, there are a lot of people who do take my route, which is that you're a complete Bible believing, everything's true, literally true view of the Bible, and then then you realize, you just think it's not that way. And then you have a broader view of the world. Eventually, what gets most people like me, at least in a modern Western world, that makes them leave the faith is, uh, for people on that particular trajectory, it's that they realize that since the Bible isn't inerrant, they've got to figure out the world on other grounds. And they look around and they realize this is a horrible place for many people, and that the problem of suffering, either because they personally suffer, because they see suffering, or they know about suffering, and that it ends up making them think, I just don't believe that there's a God who intervenes in this world anymore. So I do know a lot of people like that. I also know a lot of people, especially, especially both scholars and lay people, mainly lay people, who are so convinced that the Bible is at the root of the faith that if their views of the Bible change, then they just give it all up. And so that would be a different route. That's a route that doesn't make as much sense to me, but it is a route that a lot of people take. I'll just say within scholarship, though, most people just figure out another way of dealing with their theology once they realize that the Bible is not inerrant.
I wanted to ask also about something that, again, Josh and I have spoken about, and he's spoken about with other academics, this practice of certain denominations of Christians not going into biblical scholarship, but going into ancillary fields like Egyptology or classics.
Mm-hmm.
So they aren't necessarily confronted with the challenges that biblical scholarship can present, but they get the training in history, in research, so that then they can speak with authority.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that means they don't have to adjust their worldview in the same way that they maybe would do if they went into biblical scholarship as a distinct field?
I do think that, and there are actually various manifestations of that are pretty interesting, because I actually tried to go that route too, but to stay within biblical studies. The route that I took is one that many evangelical people take when they want to become a biblical scholar, which is that I decided I did not want to get into issues like getting a degree that dealt with New Testament theology or New Testament interpretation. I wanted to study Greek manuscripts, where I could analyze Greek manuscripts and classify Greek manuscripts, and not have to deal with issues like contradictions in the Gospels, or discrepancies between Paul's teachings and Matthew's, or even differences between Jesus and Paul and Jesus in the book of Revelation. I wasn't going to have to deal with any of that, because I was going to get the PhD working on Greek manuscripts, which is a very technical thing. It's really more like classics than it is like most New Testament scholarship. But other people do go into various kinds of historical fields that are related to the Bible, so that then they can claim expertise on the Bible. And people don't know any better because they have a PhD. The other route that people take that's interesting for American evangelicals, who want to get trained in biblical studies, want to teach biblical studies, but don't want to go, to these schools that are going to be at odds with their views, is to do a PhD in England. I don't know if you know about this route, but for New Testament scholars, this is in my day, in the
I
in the
did know
70s and
that,
80s.
but that isn't surprising.
So, as you know, in the English system, to do the PhD, you don't have to take any seminars, and there aren't qualifying exams. You do a dissertation. And so I know lots of people who went, did a master's degree at a conservative theological seminary in America, and then got in at Oxford or Cambridge or Edinburgh or wherever, and their degree was writing a dissertation. That's how the British system works, and so they never had to deal at the PhD level with very, very, kind of deep, complicated issues outside of what their dissertation was. They write their dissertation, they get the PhD from Cambridge, and so they've got a PhD from Cambridge in biblical studies, and they do have. That's right, they do have, but it means they got around having to deal with the stuff that people had to deal with when they're in seminars, talking ideas, dealing with difficult issues with each other, and it makes a huge difference. People like that who did the English route that I know almost never ever left the evangelical side of things. They just didn't. But the people in America who there are a lot of people in America that shift theologically. It's not that they leave the faith, but they end up with a different kind of understanding of what the Bible is and how it works.
We've been talking mainly about the academic journey, not completely, but mainly. I wanted to shift slightly and talk about non-academic biblical scholarship. And you've been teaching and as a result writing popular books for years. Do you have a sense that either your students deconvert as a result of your classes, or that a portion of your readership deconverts after reading?
It's an interesting question, and it's a little bit hard to answer because I don't have surveys that would
You don't send out
indicate.
reader surveys afterwards.
Several things I'll say about it. I obviously have a lot to say about it because this is a big part of my life, both because it's what I do for a living and because people talk to me about it or accuse me about it. I frequently people will say that I'm my goal is to deconvert people. I have students in my classes this last semester who went to Christian high schools who were told, don't take classes with Bart Ehrman because his goal is to deconvert you. And I find that really irritating, frankly, because I am quite upfront with my students that I'm not out to deconvert anybody or to convert anybody or to, it's not my goal in life. And I really don't care what their religious views are as long as their religious views aren't harming themselves or others. If they are harming themselves or others with their religious views, it's the same as any other view. I'm against it. But the religious views themselves don't necessarily lead to that. So I'm not trying to deconvert anybody, and I'm not teaching alternative religion. I'm teaching history, and the historical views that I teach are by and large the ones I learned at Princeton Theological Seminary training to be a minister. And so these are not anti-Christian views, but people think that if you're an atheist and you say them, that they're anti-Christian. It's kind of like, when I was at Moody Bible Institute, we would tell these jokes, right? These religious jokes, and we thought they were hilarious. If I tell these jokes now as an atheist, people get really upset with me. It's the same joke. but you just get in trouble if you're an atheist saying. So my first point is I don't try to convert or deconvert anybody.
So you don't try to, but do you get feedback ever from people saying, "Oh, this was really helpful in my deconversion journey," or the opposite? Because I had an email last week from a lay minister in the UK saying, "I've been really enjoying the podcast you do with Bart. It's very challenging, but it's very fulfilling, and I think it's wonderful." She is not in the process of deconverting. She's happy to learn more about the Bible. Do you get either of those kinds of communications?
So I've been teaching at Chapel Hill since 1988. And I don't know how many students I've had. For many years, I'd have probably 400 or 500 students a year in my classes, more than that. And so whatever that is, 25, 30, what is that? 30, almost 35 years times 500, whatever that is. I don't know. No student has ever told me they deconverted during my class. That at the end of the semester, now they were no longer a believer. I've never, ever had anybody tell me that. And I wouldn't want them to tell me that. I mean, what kind of faith do you have if you take a class for 3 months and then you leave it? You've had this faith for 20 years and now it takes 3 months to get rid of it. Well, that's not very thoughtful of you. And so I'm not for that. And I've never had that. What I have had are people who will write me later. And often it's the people who hate me the most who will write me, who hated my class. They thought I was wrong. They were in a study group that showed why I was wrong. They were in prayer groups meeting to pray for me while undergraduates. And, 8 or 9 years later, they'll write me and tell me, yeah, I was one of those. And now I just, I've left the faith because of X, Y, and Z. And I really appreciated your class because it started me thinking about things. So I get that kind of thing. I do get that kind of thing. I also get the thing where I have people write me and say, I took your class and I didn't agree with you, but it has really strengthened my faith, having to think through these issues. And I had 2 students this semester tell me that. I said, look, I disagree with you, but it really strengthened my faith taking this class. And I'm happy for them. Good. Good. I mean, I don't, you can believe what you want to believe. I just want you to be knowledgeable. I mean, I'm at a university. I want you to be knowledgeable. And it's better to be a knowledgeable Christian than an ignorant Christian. And so why would you want to be ignorant? Um, so I hear that. In the broader world, I get a lot of people write me telling me that that reading my books has led them to deconvert. They almost never explain how that worked, and I'm never quite sure how it worked, but I think probably it means that they started out questioning their faith. They were maybe raised in an evangelical setting of some kind and believed the Bible was the inspired word of God and were having doubts about it. And they read my books, and it gave them information that confirmed what their doubts were, and it led them on a path to deconversion. And I'm absolutely fine with that too. I'm fine either way. I just want people to think and go where the truth leads them.
I think that the idea that you and the larger university system in the US is out to, and I think we've spoken about this before in the when we were talking about academic freedoms, the idea that professors are out to try and indoctrinate students into atheism always baffles me, because I hear it semi-regularly. And the fact of the matter is that, I mean, there probably are some people doing that, but by and large, professors are interested in whether you're thinking about the material in a critical, scholarly way, whether you're paying attention in class, if you're turning in your assignments. Yeah. They don't aren't much interested in where you go on a Sunday morning, or if you go to Bible study after Wednesday lectures. It's just not on your radar. You're teaching a specific curriculum, and that curriculum is not, this is how to not be a Christian anymore.
No, it's not. I mean, people find this surprising about religious studies. My department has about 20 faculty members in it who teach a range of things, from Judaism to Islam to religion and culture to American religion. And we teach all sorts of things, Judaism. And no one has on their agenda to deconvert anybody or to make somebody an atheist. And I might have said this before on the podcast, but I don't recall ever having a personal religious discussion with any of my colleagues ever. I started teaching at Rutgers in 1984. And so, that's almost 30 years. What is that? I don't know how long that is. That's like 40 years ago. It's 40 years almost. Oh my God. It's like 40 years ago. And I don't think I've ever had a person where I sat down and just shared my personal religious views. It just doesn't come up, because we're doing, some of us are doing history. Some of us are doing philology, studying language. Some of us are doing sociology. Some of us are doing anthropology, all connected with religion. Cultural studies connect with religion, and we're studying religion. We're not like embracing or trying to get somebody else to embrace it. We're trying to inform people. So what I would say is that in the universities today, the academic freedom issue, I think, is that in universities today, there are a lot of left-wing professors. And I'm one of them. I'm left wing in terms of virtually every social and political issue, but I don't even enforce my social views. But there are a lot of professors who really do try to, sway their students socially and politically. I don't know of anybody who tries to do it religiously, but maybe there are people like that.
So we've been looking mainly at whether biblical scholarship destroys faith. It's the title of the episode. But in your opinion, are there ways that biblical scholarship can be helpful for Christians who want to more fully understand the Bible without deconverting or changing their religion?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, on the one hand, as I've said before, no knowledge is not bad. Knowledge, and if you're a person of faith, it is useful to be knowledgeable about what you believe, because otherwise you're just believing something because somebody told you. You need to be thinking about it, and it helps. But when it comes to biblical studies, understanding what biblical scholarship says is so helpful for anybody who wants to understand the Bible. It's not destroying the meaning of the Bible. It's opening it up in ways that you just can't imagine. Because, when I was an evangelical, just to take the Gospels as an example, we just assumed that Matthew, Mark, Luke, John were all telling the same story. And that if there's something that seems like kind of, different, you reconcile it. And by reconciling it, you make it one thing. So Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are one thing. They're not four things. And when you read it as one thing, then you got this giant narrative. But you don't understand the glorious diversity. And you don't understand how fantastically interesting it is that they're different. There are places where Luke has changed Mark's story. And if you pretend that it's saying the same thing, then you're missing what Luke's trying to do. And surely it matters to see what an author's trying to do and what he actually achieves without simply making it say the same thing as some other author. If you really want to know what I have to say, and suppose you take another scholar, like, there are lots and lots of really fine biblical scholars out there. You take something that Amy Jill Levine says, or something that Dale Allison says, or something that Paula Fredrickson says, and you assume they're saying what I say. You're going to miss what they're trying to say. Oh yeah, that's the same thing Ehrman says. No, it's not. And especially, if you take what I have to say with what an evangelical scholar maybe has to say, like Craig Evans, who's a good scholar, and you say, well, Craig Evans and Ehrman, they're both scholars. They're saying the same thing. Oh my God, we are not saying the same thing. And so why would you do that with two authors from antiquity? Later Christians said that Mark and John both belong in the Bible. Okay, great. But it doesn't mean they're saying the same thing. And if you think they are saying the same thing, you're missing the point of both of them. And surely if you think that God inspired both of them, you want to see what both of them have to say. And so I don't think it's a matter of inspiration, or it's a matter of how do you understand a book? And if you want to understand it, you have to take it seriously as a book. And biblical scholarship does that. And so it doesn't have to scare anybody off. It can open things up in ways that you just will blow your mind if you're willing, at least, to try and understand it.
And I have to say that since starting both this podcast, but also my own graduate studies and taking history and archaeology courses and some biblical Hebrew, it's much more interesting. It's fascinating. Both the world that produced all of these different texts and the texts themselves, and knowing the cultural context and the historical background, it's so much more interesting than just taking it as this static, isolated book, because it's none of those things.
Well, it's true. On one level, it's true of all kinds of scholarship. My wife Sarah is a Shakespeare scholar. And I've probably read Hamlet 5 or 6 times or something, but I just kind of read it and say, oh, that's interesting. But you hear her talk about it, you say, oh my God, that's amazing. Because it's like
this is the most fascinating thing ever written.
The depth you can get if you actually study this stuff. And so, but when it comes to the Bible, Shakespeare's hugely important for our culture, but the Bible, oh my God. And so, if you understand what each of these books is actually doing, what they're saying, it's so rich. And it isn't the kind of thing where you just read Galatians a couple times and then you know what it says. I'm telling you, it isn't like that. You can spend days thinking about one verse in Galatians and it'll just blow your mind if you're willing to do it. If you're not interested, that's fine. It's absolutely fine. But you shouldn't think that you want to be scared away from this stuff, because in fact you're refusing to go someplace that you're really going to be glad you went to. So you shouldn't do that.
The ultimate question then, before we wrap up this part of the podcast, in your experience, does biblical scholarship destroy faith?
I don't, no, I don't think biblical scholarship destroys faith. I think biblical scholarship brings knowledge, and then people decide what to do with the knowledge. And it may be that it changes faith. It certainly changed my faith. It changed me from being a fundamentalist who had a very wooden understanding of the Bible to being somebody who is actually working hard to understand what these books were really all about. It opened up the interpretation of these books for me. That led me away from fundamentalism. And so I guess it destroyed my fundamentalist beliefs, but it didn't destroy my Christian faith. My Christian faith went down for other reasons. But it can destroy, biblical scholarship can destroy faith if you've got a very strange kind of faith, which is modern fundamentalism. Now, nobody says they're a fundamentalist, right? A fundamentalist is always the guy to the right of you, right? It's never, you're not the fundamentalist. But the reality is many people have fundamentalist understandings of the Bible, that it has to be true in everything it says, or Christian faith can't be right. If that's your view, then yes, biblical scholarship can destroy that view. But if it destroys that view, it shouldn't destroy your faith. It should change your faith. It should make you realize that, in fact, it's a little more complicated than saying every word in the Bible is accurate. There's a lot to faith for those who are intelligent and who think about it. And so biblical scholarship doesn't destroy that. Almost all of my close friends in the academy, biblical scholars, agree with the approach that I take to the Bible and agree with, we all disagree on everything. I mean, but the basic views that we all have, and most of them are committed Christians. It didn't destroy their faith. It made them more interested in their faith. So no, I think the answer is the scholarship itself doesn't destroy faith at all.
Thank you very much. We're going to take a brief break and then we'll be back with some news from Bart's World and then another round of Outsmart Bart. Have you ever wondered where the New Testament Gospels really came from? Were the books actually written by Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, as everyone seems to say? The answers to these questions may surprise you. In fact, what you discover may challenge everything you thought you knew about the Gospels. If you're ready to learn the historical truth, then you won't want to miss Bart Ehrman's free webinar, Did Matthew, Mark, Luke and John actually write Matthew, Mark, Luke and John? In this 50-minute talk with Q&A, you'll learn answers to some of the most intriguing questions surrounding the Gospels' authorship, such as, why did early Christians say the Gospels were written by Matthew, Mark, Luke and John if they're anonymous? What's the best evidence that the Gospels were written by the Apostles? Were the Apostles of Jesus educated well enough to write books? And last, if the Apostles did not write the Gospels, who did? And where did they get their information? Don't miss your chance to uncover the truth behind the Gospels. Sign up now for free lifetime access to Did Matthew, Mark, Luke and John actually write Matthew, Mark, Luke and John at barterman.com/authors. Thank you. Welcome back. Bart, what is going on in your world at the moment?
Well, I have a lecture coming up, a remote lecture that people can find on my website, barterman.com. And this one, it's a lecture on who killed Jesus. Throughout history, of course, Jews have been accused as being Christ killers. In the New Testament, are they responsible for killing Jesus? And if they are, is that historically right? Most historical scholars think that it's the Romans who killed Jesus, which raises the interesting question. If you say Jews are Christ killers and they weren't, and the Romans killed, should you say that Italians are Christ killers? Why do you say Jews are Christ killers? It doesn't make any sense. No way would say Italians are Christ killers. Anyway, we're getting into this entire historical issue. What can we actually say about who is responsible for the death of Jesus? And that's what the lecture is going to be about. It's a pretty important thing because it has broader implications for the history of culture in the West.
Excellent. Well, I think we'll probably be talking about that in upcoming episodes in a little bit more detail, but that sounds really very interesting. We're going to now go to our Outsmart Bart.
Dr. Ehrman has written 6 New York Times best-selling books and holds a PhD from Princeton. It's not often you'll see him made a fool, but it doesn't hurt to try. It's time for Outsmart Bart.
Okay, Bart, are you ready?
We'll see.
We'll see. Maybe. I think all of these questions are from, they're all from Genesis. So.
What? Yeah, good luck with this one.
Question 1. Who is the oldest person mentioned in Genesis who was still alive when Abraham was born?
Wow, that's a good question. I thought it was going to be who is the oldest man in the Bible, which would be Methuselah, who was the great-grandfather of Noah. Great-great-grandfather. Who was the oldest man when Abraham... I have no idea.
Oldest person when Abraham was born was Noah.
Well, see,
which I didn't know that.
Is Methuselah's great-great-grandson. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, I got the right family line anyway. Really? Noah was alive when Abraham was born?
Our listener says so. I have not checked these for.
Well, one thing I know is that Noah was not killed in the flood.
This is very true. This is true. So, second question: how old was Abraham when Noah died?
Yeah, well, okay, I'm going to miss that one too because, okay, we need a fact checker here. These sound like questions I didn't even know when I was a fundamentalist. I used to know all that stuff. But well, okay, good.
60 years. And
Noah was 60 years old.
No, Abraham was 60 when Noah died.
Oh, Abraham was 60 when Noah. Okay.
And final question, who is the oldest person mentioned in Genesis who was still alive when Abraham died? Same family line.
Shem. All right.
Shem, who apparently survived Abraham by 35 years.
Wow. Okay. Well, look.
People are not being kind to you with these Outsmart Bart questions. They're really going for it.
Well, Genesis is not like, not exactly my wheelhouse.
No, that's true. I'll have to try and find some New Testament submissions next time.
No, actually, I don't mind missing Old Testament questions. It's like, okay. Wow, those are good trivia questions, though, because I need to catch up on my genealogies. But that's the other thing. Genealogies ain't my long suit either.
No, I must confess, genealogies are not my favorite thing in ancient texts, even a little bit. Well, before we finish for the week, can you just summarize what we talked about?
Yeah, we're talking about the importance of biblical scholarship and whether the kind of historical scholarship that I and many others do is damaging to faith, or whether it destroys faith. And my view is that it does not destroy faith. It doesn't need to destroy faith. There's no reason it needs to destroy faith unless your faith is a fundamentalist faith. You may not think you have a fundamentalist faith, but if your faith is that you've got to believe every word of the Bible or you can't be a Christian, then you've got that's a fundamentalist belief, whether you consider yourself a fundamentalist or not. I think biblical scholarship can certainly change faith. It can mature faith. It can make faith more knowledgeable rather than ignorant. And so that's good. And it can lead people to be more open-minded about the world generally, which can lead to a loss of faith. But I don't think the scholarship itself is going to destroy faith. And I don't think people need to be afraid of scholarship any more than they ought to be afraid of any other knowledge. Knowledge is good. People sometimes say, you just learn too much. You study too much. No, that's not a good thing to say, because you can't know too much.
Thank you so much, audience. Thank you all for listening. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, please subscribe to the podcast and make sure you don't miss future episodes. Remember also that you can use the code MJPodcast for a discount on all of Bart's courses and his upcoming web lecture over at www.bartehrman.com. Misquoting Jesus will be back next week, but without me. Bart, who are you going to be talking to and what are you talking to them about?
So next week I'm having an interview. I'm interviewing somebody who is actually, Megan, in your field. This is my colleague Joseph Lamb. That's why I get to interview him. He has an office down the road down the hall from me. He's an expert in Hebrew Bible, but especially in the ancient Near Eastern languages and civilizations. That's his PhD from the University of Chicago, and he's just done a 12-lecture course on creation stories in the ancient world. Kind of a comparative study of different creation stories, including Genesis, but also including Mesopotamian stories and Egyptian stories about how the world came into existence. And the interesting thing is how closely they relate in many ways to the biblical accounts. So we'll be talking about Genesis and talking about these Mesopotamian tales, especially the Enuma Elish, which is the Babylonian creation story, it's sometimes called.
And I will absolutely be listening to that episode because I love creation stories and I find the connections between them all really very interesting. So I hope you can all join Bart and Joseph Lamb for that. I'll be back the following week, so I'll see you then. Thank you, everyone, and goodbye. This has been an episode of Misquoting Jesus with Bart Ehrman. We'll be back with a new episode next Tuesday. So please be sure to subscribe to our show for free on your favourite podcast listening app or on Bart Ehrman's YouTube channel so you don't miss out. From Bart Ehrman and myself, Megan Lewis, thank you for joining us.